to CTN, which is a new option in the cheat settings, which can allow you to download the latest cheats. The latest cheats. And you can also filter for only downloading cheats for games that you have already installed. So that is a new feature that has been added in this version. Plus, we also got stability improvements, along with the identification of a few problematic homebrew apps that are causing issues with GoldHEN, which can cause it to malfunction when entering and exiting rest mode, or when shutting down the system. And those applications are the Apollo Save Tool, Flow, and Orbis Toolbox. So those are the updates there with the latest version of GoldHEN. We also got the release of a new version of the Apollo Save Tool. Now this version is specifically for adding PS to support. So any PS to games that you run on the PS4, you'll be able to manage the save files now in the Apollo Save Tool. So there's a bunch of new options here that have been added PlayStation to virtual memory card images. So you can, of course, import saves into the virtual memory card from the hard drive or from the USB, and then if you go to the save management option, you can also do things like, of course, export the save files from the virtual memory cards. And you can actually export the virtual memory cards VM2 format or VMC format as well. So a bunch of options there. We also have online database added PS to saves so listing. You'll now be able to download PlayStation from the online database, not just PS for saves. We also have a save sorting option so by you type. Can filter for PS for save, PS to saves, and VMC. And then, of course, we also have support for additional features that are added in this new version of Apollo Save Tool. Of course, you can download it using the Homebrew Store on your PS4. Just go onto the Homebrew Store. And you can actually just go to the Apollo Save Tool and then select the option to update to the latest version. And that will get you updated. And the Apollo Save Tool might have its own built-in updater. I can't actually remember. Generally, I always find it's more reliable using the Homebrew Store personally, because sometimes these built-in updaters to these homebrew apps don't always work properly. Yeah, anyway, there we go. So we've got a new version of the Apollo Save Tool. Now, another thing for PS4, and this also affects PS5, is that there have been some developments in relation to the Louise script that we covered in a previous news update, which is the ability to use Lua script, or execute Lua script through a save file. Which has been discovered for games that use the Artemis engine, which tend to be a lot of Japanese weeb games, but that's just how it is. So these games actually use Lua script, and you can enter custom Lua script and run it. But that isn't an exploit. It's just something that could potentially turn into an exploit. That's where we left off from the last time that we covered this. However, this time, it looks like there's been several developments to actually make this into a usable exploit. And we're getting very close to that being an actual reality. We now actually have the developer Jazine, who's working with Null Pointer and various other people in the R&D who are Discord collaborating here to try and turn this into a usable userland exploit, which can then be used to trigger kernel exploits in the PS5 and the PS4. So if a new kernel exploit comes out for the PS, say it's 11.50, 11.52, 11.02, 12.0, etc., perhaps we could use the save file exploit to trigger that kernel exploit and get a jailbreak that way. So it's just another user that will be handy to have in our back pocket for when a potential new kernel exploit comes out. So that's something that we can definitely look forward to. And of course, also for the PS5, we could also use this to potentially trigger the kernel exploit that we're currently using, with a WebKit currently using the WebKit exploit as our entry point. Our userland exploit to trigger that up to 5.50. And then for higher firmwares, we have the Blu-ray drive exploit. This would be a third potential method of triggering that same kernel exploit using a save file. And there's still more developments to come. I wouldn't necessarily say it's 100% concrete and the project on GitHub has not yet been updated. So I don't want to jump the gun here, but there's definitely been a lot of progress happening, which has taken this from just being able to execute through a save file to actually triggering some vulnerabilities. That could certainly lead to this becoming a full userland exploit. So good progress happening there as well. Now let's go ahead and move on to the PlayStation 5. Because we do have several developments happening there. So of course we got the release of hypervisor by Spectre, and that has now been fully integrated into IdleSauce exploit host. So IdleSauce has now created a proper host for running the exploit. Previously, these were just tests where it would run the ELF loader, but now we actually have the payloads integrated into the web host. So now when you execute the UMTX exploit using IdleSauce's you will actually get a bunch of payloads that you can select from. There's FTP, there's the web server. You've got a bunch of other things like keylogger shell server, You can also do things like display your SK version and all of that kind of stuff, and then we have for 1.x and to .x, we have hypervisor you can run, which will actually run the hypervisor exploit. So that is what we have access to now. Now, one of the issues that I covered in my own tutorial on how to set up the bypasser exploit was that there is an issue with slow down with the current version. So the current version runs very slow, especially when you're trying to launch games. You'll have it take a lot longer to actually load, and then the loading times are much longer than they should be. It actually seems slower than K-Stuff, which is the other workaround we use to get around the hypervisor. On higher firmwares where we don't have a proper hypervisor exploit, whereas it should be a lot faster. It's just using kernel patches. So Spectre actually replied to this directly. He said the issue with stuff being slow might just be because I left too much loading code in the hooks. I'll probably release a better version that should hopefully fix that. So that would be good. We might see a kind of improved version of bypasser, and that will run a lot faster. So it looks like it's not a big issue. It seems that Spectre can probably fix this quite quickly by just removing the logging code in the hood and then releasing a new version that will run a lot faster. So that is what we're hoping for. Lightning Mods might actually beat him to it, because Lightning Mods has recently received a 2.30 test kit from Zico and is now working on his own version of ETA HEN using the bypasser exploit. So we can see here from this post on X, it took some additional kernel patches in HEN, but the ETA HEN toolbox is alive on 30 thanks to Echo Stretch for porting these additional patches to other .xx firmware. So yeah, it looks like we could be seeing a version of ETA HEN that uses hypervisor instead of K-Stuff. So direct kernel patches, which means a lot more stable. If you remember, one of the big issues we've had with ETA HEN recently is the fact that it's adding all of these additional features that all run in the background. Tends to cause more slowdown as well as instability issues. But that shouldn't really be a problem once we actually have a version that uses bypasser, where it's using direct kernel patches instead of having this a K-Stuff version where we have like this background process that has to handle all of these different things and slows down the system. We won't have that issue on 1.x and to once we get this version of ETA HEN coming out. Lightning Mods version of ETA HEN will automatically put the system into rest bypasser exploit. You don't have to do it manually, and to go along with this Mods is also working on a version of items which will also work on these older firmware using the bypasser exploit. So last but not least, we've also had some updates on the Blu-ray drive implementation of the PS5 UMTX exploit. So a few updates here. One of them is that bypasser has actually been added in here. So if you are on 1.x to .x you can actually try the bypasser exploit from a Blu-ray disc instead. Now again, it's not recommended really, because the WebKit is just a better way of loading it generally, and it's more stable. So I wouldn't really recommend trying to load bypasser from a Blu-ray disc right now. It's just more of a proof of concept to show that it can be done. So you just send one of the UMTX snapshots. You wait for that to execute, and once that's fully executed, you then send the bypasser snapshot there. And that will actually run the bypasser exploit on the PS5. Now, you have to enter rest mode and then recover from rest mode. And then load it again a second time. So that's why it doesn't really make sense to use the Blu-ray drive, because it takes much longer. It's much better just to use the WebKit. But again, it's a proof of concept to show that the Blu-ray drive method can be used also to load the bypasser exploit on 1.x and to .x firmware. Now, speaking of the bypasser exploit, Spectre has also mentioned the idea of switching the primary method used for bypasser over to the jump table version. So he ran a poll here on X where he says, do people care enough not wanting to use rest mode and switch the primary exploit for bypasser to the jump tables one? It's higher maintenance and possibly slightly less stable, but would be slightly more convenient to run. I guess, and the majority of people did vote yes for this. I did vote. I personally voted no because I think stability is better personally, and especially less maintenance for developers would also be better, in my opinion, but the majority of people don't like the fact that put the system and recover it takes quite a while. They would rather switch it over to the jump tables one. So we'll see if Spectre decides to actually do that or not, which would eliminate the need to use rest mode. But it would make things less stable, which I think is probably a bad trade-off. Depends how unstable it makes it. I suppose, because if it's a very unstable and you're crashing multiple times trying to run it, then surely just entering rest mode and recovering rest mode takes less time than going through multiple crashes. That's how I feel about it. But again, it depends. If it's pretty stable, then that might not really be an issue. So yeah, anyway, we'll see if he decides to switch it over to the other version. I mean, we could just have two versions to kind of test, see which one we like the best. I guess, because we have to hypervisor exploits that Spectre released. By hypervisor, there was the QA flags, which is the version that's primarily used where you have to enter rest mode and recover in order for it to work. And then there's the jump tables exploit, which is again less stable and higher maintenance, but does not require you to enter and exit rest mode when actually running the exploit. But anyway, that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and once again,